When it comes to prioritizing lower body development, and specifically the posterior component of the body, the GHD, which is an acronym for the Glute Ham Developer, is a staple unit in any well-equipped training facility or even well-equipped home gym or garage gym setup. When it comes to primary exercise selection, having access to a squat rack, barbell, and weight plates is obviously the top of my concern, but in consideration of accessory lifts, secondary exercise variations, having a beast like this is worth your while. One of the main reasons why is because the majority of the work that you can do on a GHD prioritizes the posterior chain, which is the most neglected group of muscles in the largest amount of people. Underdeveloped hamstrings, glutes, and lower back often are a hindrance to people's progression in the gym, but also a contributing factor to their risk of injury. Now, other than the unfounded fear that people have that when they use this machine, they're somehow going to tip the entire thing over, which is, I'm pretty sure, impossible, because we've actually tried in order to prove to people that it just won't happen. This is a machine that is actually extremely welcoming to all levels of training capacity. Just to give you an example, if I can fit in the screen while I do these, of a moderate rate of progression relative to a beginner, intermediate, and more advanced trainee in consideration of the development of their posterior chain. So first off, you might have a traditional back extension. It could be body weight, it could be loaded on either of these variations I'm about to display. As the individual gets more advanced, doing back extensions might become a little bit easy, or at the very least monotonous, and they might have the hamstring, glute, and lower back strength handle something a little more challenging, such as a razor curl variation, where they'll be reaching straight out and pulling straight back, straight out and pulling straight back. If that becomes a little bit too easy, we can adjust ever so slightly and transition into a more advanced full glute ham raise. Now, on this variation, my head is going to for sure leave the video screen, but there's two versions of this that are beneficial. The first one being a swing through. So as someone starts out, they might not have adequate strength to go all the way through, so they can use a little bit of momentum from the bottom. As they become even stronger, they can move with a strict variation, where they pause at about parallel to the floor and then come right back up to the top of the movement. Now, that alone, which is a simple 4-stage progression. And as somebody who pulls in the low to mid 500s on both conventional and sumo deadlifts, I can attest to the fact that personally, I'm just getting to the point where I feel comfortable with a moderate rep range and volume on glute ham raises, the fourth of the variations presented there. Under load, my form is compromised, and even doing multiple sets of 6 to 8 reps, and I'm just about toast. Now, when working with new clients and trainees who are relatively inexperienced in the weight room, it can become very challenging to strengthen the posterior chain in a measurable sense, because many of the movements that are going to be the most beneficial do require some degree of skill. Consider a basic hip hinge, and it's not that you cannot teach that movement, but oftentimes it's easier to teach when a foundation of strength is present. So you can start an individual out with the first exercise that I quickly displayed there, a traditional back extension, where they can work on learning to manage their own body weight to begin with. Depending, of course, on how you have yours set up, or the one you're using is set up, you could even have an anchor point behind the machine in which you could put some form of vest on or sling a band around to provide a little bit of added resistance to those individuals who are really, really starting out when it comes to lower back development. As a general rule, before an individual transitions into weighted back extensions, I like to make sure that they can do 15 to 20 rep sets for 3 to 5 sets, of course depending on the demographic of the individual executing the back extension. Being able to complete that amount of volume often proves a solid foundation with which we can start working on the hip hinge movement pattern, as well as starting to load the back extension with a variety of different loading protocols. But dumbbells aren't the only way that you can load this machine, and that's why I have so much fun with the GHD. So yeah, we have the traditional dumbbell, but here's a fun way that I've started to load this, because what happens with some individuals is their lower back starts to become quite strong, but holding on to a barbell or dumbbell actually is limited by their grip strength, right? Doing, say, a 15 rep set holding on to a 50-pound dumbbell doesn't seem like a big deal until you're 5 sets deep with short rest periods, and you realize just holding the dumbbell itself is compromising your ability to finish the sets compared to the larger muscle groups, being the hamstrings, glutes, and lower back, that are now much more developed than they ever were initially. So what I've started doing is using a small sleeve just like this, and stacking the weight plates and then using a vest, and I won't get this fully set up, but you'll get the idea. Using a weight vest that would traditionally be used for like a sled or a belt squat variation. And now we have the load available, so that when I do the back extension, the grip strength limiting factor is completely eliminated from the lift itself. This also allows for quite extensive loading, in consideration that, like, we'll base that with a 45 and build up from there. So very quickly you can imagine we can get a lot more than a traditional 100, 120 pound dumbbell on there. And it's not as awkward as trying to pick up a barbell. It also still allows for a full range of motion, whereas the barbell sometimes, depending on how you set everything up, can shorten the range of motion of the back extension itself. But even then, that's not all. I'm just going to angle this down for a brief moment and show you that at the bottom of the GHD, we have access to varying band panels. So we can actually do these with band tension, which is going to change the expression of strength across each repetition. Because now, where you might have had not an elimination of resistance, but maybe an easier position of resistance at the top of the back extension or the top of a full glute ham raise, you're now going to have this band tension increasing throughout the repetition, which is going to make it significantly more challenging. Let me give you an example of what it looks like when you do a full glute ham raise with the resistance set up in this way. So I'm going to get that vest on, obviously without a weight plate. See if I have the ability to get this on alone. Good. All right, so what I'm going to do is clamp the carabiner right on to the band, or maybe the band into the carabiner. We'll see which is easiest here as I unbuckle myself. Nice, we're off to the races. Try that again. Okay, I think we're good now. Round 2. So from this position, as I hit the bottom of the repetition, so it really changes the expression of strength required. So as you can see, this band is not very high tension. So in theory, what you could do is actually employ the band tension to different ranges of motion relative to an individual's physical capacity. So say you were doing a traditional back extension and load just wasn't doing it anymore. You wanted to change the expression of strength in that specific range of motion. You could just strap down a heavy tension band for someone who is still working on that traditional back extension, and it would apply that increased resistance at the lockout of the back extension itself, which could help them develop adequate hamstring strength to then transition slowly into a razor curl. As well, this allows you to kind of experiment with different rep ranges and rest pause scenarios where you might want to hold the lockout for a period of time with this added resistance, or possibly on a per rep basis. So maybe every 5th rep of a 20 rep set, you're going to hold for 5 seconds at the peak of the range of motion to increase time under tension, as well as to increase the amount of blood flow that you're getting to the targeted muscle. There's really endless possibilities in consideration of how you can set up the resistance and how you can adjust and manage the contributing variables in consideration of rep range, sets, total volume, etc. Now, as I mentioned, for a complete beginner, a back extension and even a lightly loaded back extension could prove to be a foundational exercise to develop that posterior chain strength, but at some point you're likely going to transition into a loaded hip hinge once you become proficient at the movement pattern and you can consistently execute it with quality of form. At this point you'll likely move into maybe a conventional sumo or trap bar variation, as those are typically the most common loaded hip hinges that people start with. But that doesn't mean you stop doing back extensions or razor curls or what may be. That just means its position in the programming usually changes. So as an example, this can often be a warm-up for people, where they might do 2 or 3 sets to get a little bit of blood flowing and prime those muscles that are going to be used in that loaded hip hinge pattern. Further, it becomes a secondary exercise that continues to contribute to the development of the foundation of both muscular development and strength that is going to be required to continue to move heavier and heavier loads on those loaded hip hinge patterns. Obviously, strengthening the posterior chain as well is going to contribute across many lower body lifts. Consider heavy loaded walking lunges, squat variations, and as you can imagine, this could be a very extensive list if we so desire. But regardless, this becomes a very beneficial contributing secondary exercise. Well, not just an exercise, but a machine that offers a multitude of exercise variations that all can be considered beneficial accessory lifts to your primary exercise selection with which you're measuring your strength progressions over time. Now, from a coaching perspective, I like to incorporate this in 2 primary ways. And now there's so many ways that you can incorporate this, but this is just a general approach regardless of which variation you might be employing on the GHD. So this is whether or not you're using a back extension, a razor curl, a swing through GHR, a full GHR, whether you're using dumbbell, whether you're using weight plates to load it, whether you're using band tension, what may be. How I personally like to program it is starting out in an individual's block, and of course the rep range and the weight employed is always relative to the individual's physical capacity, is with a lighter load and higher reps. And then what I like to do is I like to taper down the rep range, and I like to increase the load throughout an individual's training block, usually ending with either a heavier weight or the same way they ended with last time for more repetitions than they were previously able to. To what degree it's irrelevant, PR is a PR, so maybe last training block they left with 50 pounds for 5 sets of 10. This training block they managed 50 pounds for 5 sets of 12, or 3 sets of 12 and 2 sets of 10, just a little bit of a progression. Or possibly they were able to manage 55 pounds for a set of 4. It was the most weight they had ever done, so even though they dropped significantly in reps, they were still able to move a greater load. That's the approach that I often take in programming, but another approach that I like to incorporate is actually a superset with another hamstring exercise. And this is generally when the priority is less on the development of strength and more so the development of muscular size, because as is the case, a larger muscle has the potential to become a stronger muscle, and a stronger muscle consequently has the potential to become a larger muscle. So they kind of feed off of each other in a way. So when the primary focus becomes increasing size of the muscle, supersets tend to become quite a bit of fun. And this is across the board with all muscular development. It's a great way to increase time under tension. It's also a great way to increase blood flow to a specific area of the body. So, as an example, we might run the back extension and combine this with a band pull through or a banded hamstring curl. We might do a light stiff leg dumbbell deadlift for high reps and then jump on back extension with just body weight for high reps. Generally speaking, it doesn't take a lot of load when combining this with another posterior chain dominant movement to really drive that intensity and that increase in blood flow to those targeted muscles. So this was a relatively impromptu video that was inspired in part by some random questions I got on social media the other day. All of those questions in combination kind of, formed the foundation for this random video that I made. But as you can imagine, as impromptu as this video was, it really showcases how progressive this piece of equipment is when it comes to developing the posterior compartment of the body. It shows that even though it looks like it can only do one or two things, it's actually extremely versatile. I mean, I didn't even go into an exhaustive list. I just showcased my 4 favorite variations. We had a back extension, a razor curl, a swing through glute ham raise, and a full glute ham raise. Single leg variations, banded variations, traditional dumbbell loaded variations loaded with a weight plate, high reps, low reps, in combination with supersets to prioritize blood flow. There's a lot that you can do with it, and you can get very creative in how you incorporate it into your programming. It's a great tool for beginners, intermediate, and advanced trainees. It's incredibly versatile, and although it often comes across as intimidating to most people, it's a tool that proves progressive for a lot, if not the majority, of people who go to the gym, all demographics considered. So I sincerely hope, if you've been going to the gym and you've seen this hanging around and you've never used one of them, you start to reconsider that decision. And maybe you start to incorporate it into your own programming so that you can experience the progressive yields that it provides. Further, if you happen to train at a gym that doesn't have one of these for you to access, I hope you cancel that membership and find a gym that actually serves your true potential. All joking aside, I seriously hope you consider going to a place where you do have access to such a progressive tool such as this. And further, if in all this lockdown chaos you're considering building your own home gym or garage gym setup, you might want to put this on the wish list. Hopefully you found this to be an informative video, and as per usual, if you have any specific questions or inquiries or curiosities relative to fitness, training, nutrition, or just lifestyle in general, send them my way, whether you comment on the video or you shoot me a DM. Either way works. And as per usual, if I'm able to answer, you can bet that it will be covered in an upcoming post.